After the housing bubble destroyed economies in 2008, the belief that central bankers with expert knowledge could do no wrong was shattered. And because of that, we believe that the outcomes for all should not be determined by the few. Because central bankers continue to have massive influence on our lives, people must have a say in who they are. We have three arguments. First, we uphold democratic principles. Second, we improve people's lives. And third, we rebuild trust in economic institutions. What do we mean by central banks? We refer to institutions which manage a nation's currency, either through the supply of money or through the interest rate, which is known as monetary policy. Governments manage fiscal policy, which is the use of taxpayers' money for state spending. Basically, central banks have two main purposes. First, central banks manage a nation's money supply by printing money or setting interest rates. Second, in times of financial crisis, they act as a lender of last resort by bailing out failing banks. Examples of central banks include the Bank of England or the Central Bank of Turkey. Conversely, commercial banks are banks like Barclays in the UK or AK Bank in Turkey. Quite intuitively, we think the director of a central bank has immense influence over a nation's monetary policy because he sets the agenda for that bank. What is our policy? We stand for, first, electing the heads of central banks every 4 to 6 years, just like politicians. If term limits exist within that country, we will impose those too. Second, candidates for the position will campaign as independents. Obviously, we will mandate full disclosure of relevant personal information and require every candidate to openly publish their credentials as part of right to access. Third, comprehensive financial literacy education in schools, workplaces, public spaces that cover the essentials of monetary policy. Such information will also be readily available online or through the mass media like television and radio. And we would mandate candidates, no thank you, a fixed campaign budget and schedule, publicized debates for guaranteed ad time. So we would make voting booths accessible as well. Finally, if we find that the head of a bank has been corrupt, then the existing measures to remove elected officials will apply. We think the world is seeing a trend towards more democracy. Citizens vote in police commissioners. They elect their judges. They vote in referendums on policies. Our policy is part of this democratic progression. First argument, we uphold democratic principles. Why do people have the right to vote? Because every autonomous person deserves a say in how their lives are governed. And this is why we let people elect their political leaders. I think the directors of central banks have just as much, if not more, sway over people's lives, because they dictate the policy of that bank. But before I move on, yes. We think because people are intimately affected by the economy and by the issues which surround that. We think in the same way I can vote for a president who wants to invade Mali, even if I don't know the complex geopolitical situation of Mali, we can elect central bankers as well. Back to my point. Why is this important? It's important for two reasons. One, central banks have a huge impact on the economy and people's lives. We don't think opposition is going to dispute this. Second, and more importantly, because central banks do not have any objective good to strive towards. Rather, every decision involves competing priorities. If you weaken your currency, you create manufacturing jobs, but you also make it harder for people to buy rice imported from Thailand. If you raise interest rates, you curb inflation, but it also means the average man is more likely to be unemployed. It isn't clear that one of these priorities is more important than the other. So clearly, a lot of the decisions a central banker makes is political rather than technocratic. So if there are policies which have massive impacts on people, and there are no objectively good decisions, then surely people should get to decide what goals they want to pursue or prioritize. Why should we do this through elections or directors of central banks? Because the vote gives people the power to appoint decision makers within these central banks. And this allows the general will of the population to shape the economic vision for that central bank in the nation. It also allows people to set the economic agenda and the central bank's priorities. So for instance, the electorate might choose that combating high unemployment is more important than sticking to low inflation targets. Crucially, no thank you, and this is where I do partly with their point, we need a vote specifically for central bankers because in political elections, people vote on a whole range of issues, like social rights or foreign policy. Economic policy can't be just one of many considerations we have because the economy underpins our ability to act in so many other areas. Moreover, and here's where I deal further with their point, I think people understand the outcomes they are voting for. They don't need to vote on specific central bank policies, but they decide on the broad direction of whether they want less unemployment or they would rather less inflation. We think they can make this vote based on the manifestos of candidates, based on their credentials, based on their track record. This is no different from any other political election where people vote on taxation or on fiscal policy, even though in those cases they are economic decisions as well. Thus, because directors of central banks have immense influence on our lives, democratic principles mean we must elect them. Second argument, that we improve people's lives. I think in the status quo, the financial elite are massively overrepresented by central bankers. Why? Because candidates for directorship are nominated by the financial elite. Bankers and traders have massive lobbying power in parliament to influence who is given the post. This is why every single head of the US Federal Reserve has come from a large Wall Street firm. Of the 10, 6 of them have come from either JP Morgan Chase or Goldman Sachs. And this means that central bankers have an incentive to pander to the interests of these rich bankers, because that is the power base that got them their position in the first place. Second, because central bankers often only come to the attention of political people who appoint them after they work their way up the ranks of Wall Street. Apart from networks of patronage, that means that central bankers are often blinkered by the lens of the financial elite. They view the impact of monetary policy through its impact on the large financial firms from which they come. This is incredibly dangerous when central bankers are immune to public accountability. Why? Because monetary policy that is good for bankers is often bad for people. Raising interest rates helps banks by increasing their profits. It is bad for average people because it stifles lending, slows growth, and often raises unemployment. This is precisely what happened in Turkey last year, when the central bank raised interest rates to 10%. It was incredibly unpopular. It did hurt the people, but because it helped the banks, it stayed that way. How does the policy correct this? We realign the incentives of central bankers with those of the vast majority of people who now elect them. When central bankers are beholden to the man on the street, they're much more likely to focus on his needs than those of a tiny financial elite which they come from. Furthermore, we force candidates for directorship to shift their view of monetary policy and its impact from solely what it does to big financial firms, but consider the impact and the different lens of the average man on the street when they campaign, when they have to appeal to those particular concerns. We think this applies in all countries, because whether you are a developed country or a developing country, the interests of the majority are only secure when they can hold decision makers directly accountable, as opposed to when those decision makers are appointed by a tiny elite. Thus, our policy improves people's lives and upholds democratic principles I am so proud to propose.